Thank you everybody for coming out. Appreciate it. I want to go through a little bit of the history of Hanukkah as it occurred before the Nes of Hanukkah happened. So one of the common themes in Svarim is that when something happens on a given day, for example, when Yetzias Mitzrayim happened in Chodesh Nisan, it's not that it happened to occur in Chodesh Nisan, but that Nisan revealed that it is a time for redemption. So for example, Avraham Avinu ate matzahs on Pesach before the Jewish people left Egypt. Right? It came time when Haman was making a goyrel, he was making a lottery to figure out which month was going to be the month that he would kill all the Jews. So he started going through the different months. He started Nisan was no good because the Jews were redeemed. Iyar was no good because Pesach Sheni is in Iyar. He's going through the year. Av and Tammuz and Av, Hashem excluded from the raffle because he said it's too horrible. Those months, it's out of the raffle. So he skipped over those two. And then he got to Kislev, and he said, Kislev, we're not going to murder the Jewish people in Kislev because Kislev is the month of Hanukkah. Now keep in mind that Haman lived at least 300 years before Hanukkah occurred, right? So what's going on is obviously that Hanukkah is a revelation. The Nes of Hanukkah revealed something that was going on well before the Nes actually happened. And we'll try to go through some Ramazim in Torah. The title of this year is The Metaphysical History of Hanukkah. We'll try to explore the history of Hanukkah before it actually happened, and why, when it happened, it should be no surprise that Hanukkah occurred on Chafei of Kislev. So now if you look through Mishnah and Talmud, you'll notice that in Mishnah, the word Hanukkah is mentioned 14 times, every time in relation to a tangential subject. So for example, if you have an ox that's filled with hay, and it happens to pass by a lit Hanukkah menorah, because it's Hanukkah, the fellow's allowed to keep his menorah outside, and if it lights the hay, the owner of the camel is responsible. For example, another reference is that you can't fast on Hanukkah. Another reference is that you can bring bikurim until Hanukkah, but Mishnah does not at all discuss what is Hanukkah. Hanukkah as a subject is not discussed in Mishnah at all. In Talmud, there's 2 pages in Shabbos that discuss what Hanukkah is. The subject there is what type of wicks are you allowed to use for Shabbos candles, and the Gemara links it to Hanukkah candles. And the Gemara explores what is Hanukkah, what's the celebration of Hanukkah. So we'll go through briefly what happened, and then we'll try to go through the prehistoric mystical history or metaphysical history of what occurred on that day. So the Gemara says, "My Hanukkah, what's Hanukkah? Why are we lighting candles in Hanukkah?" So the Gemara says in the 25th day of Kislev, we count 8 days of Hanukkah. The reason is because when the Syrian Greeks entered the Beis HaMikdash, they were metame, they defiled all the oil, and there was no pure oil to be able to light the menorah. When the Hashmonaim monarchy came in, and they were victorious in the battle, they came into the temple, they saw it was desecrated, and they found only one jar of oil that only had enough oil for 1 day of lighting. It was the only jar that was sealed. It's called a pach. Pach is a jar. We'll get back to that word, what a pach is. And God made a miracle, and with one night of oil, the menorah burned for 8 nights. The next year, the rabbis instituted 8 days of celebration in memory of the miracle of Kislev. So let's start in the beginning of time. What exactly happened? The first thing, try to explore things chronologically, or mostly chronologically, and try to see what happened on Hanukkah before Hanukkah actually happened. So in the Bria Sa'olam, right before as the world is being created, we find the world was null and void. Va'aretz haisa tayu v'avayu v'choshech al pnei tohaim. The Medrash says that that's referring to the 4 different types of golus that the Jewish people would go through. Again, this is right at the beginning of creation, almost before anything is created. The possibility of creation is the only thing that exists, And the first thing we find is exile. Who are the four exiles? So one is Toyu, the other one is Vayu. The third one is the Malchus of Yavan, the Syrian Greek Empire. And that refers to Chayshech, darkness. The exile of darkness of Yavan is hinted at right in the beginning of the Torah. Right before it says, Yehi Or, there's going to be a light. It says there's going to be a darkness. And that darkness is the assault of the Syrian Greek Empire and the later subjugation of the Jewish people underneath their dominion, and the Hellenization and assimilation of the Jewish people who lived at that time, the time of the Nes of Hanukkah. So now what's the next thing that happens? Yehi Or. God says there's going to be light. What does it mean there's going to be a light? Light is always a metaphor in spiritual terms for a spiritual reality where things are clear. Just as light illuminates the darkness, there's a spiritual light that illuminates the darkness of Yavan, the darkness of Chayshech. And then it says, Vayavdil Elokim es ha'or, and God separated the light. Now he didn't really separate the light, he separated the light and the darkness. So what does Rashi explain? When God created light, he created two types of light. He created the spiritual light called the Or Hagonos, the hidden light, and he created the light that we see. And immediately, the first day of creation, God saw that this spiritual light is way too powerful to exist in the world unfettered and uncontrolled. So what did he do? He hid it. He hid the light. It's called the Or Hagonos, the hidden light. How long did that light exist for? So it existed for 12 hours on the first day of creation, because the first day of creation was 12 hours long, and God allowed it to continue for the 24 hours that Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden. So we have a total of 36 hours of light. I'll try to come back to this at the end and see how this light relates to Hanukkah, because this is the light of Hanukkah. I'll get to that. Okay, so who was the first one to make a party on Hanukkah? First man to make a party on Hanukkah. Anybody? The question gives away the answer.
What is the question?
Who was the first man to make a party on Hanukkah? The first man. Very simple. The first man. Adam Rishon made a party on Hanukkah. What was the story? It's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Ches Amud Aleph. The story of Adam Rishon's Hanukkah party. What happened was, so the world began on Chaf Hei Elul. In the yearly cycle, the difference between the equinoxes and the solstice is 91 and a quarter days. Or let's say 91 days, for argument's sake. 91 days after Chaf Hei Elul is Chaf Hei Kislev. And what happened was the world was created on the equinoxes. The days, or at least Adam Rishon, was created on the equinox. The first equinox, which was 5 days post equinox. The days are very long. The days and the nights are equal, so to speak. Then Adam Rishon he sins in Gan Eden. He eats from the fruit of the tree, and God decrees death on Adam Rishon. And Adam Rishon begins to notice that the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer. And as we move from the equinox toward the winter solstice, every day is getting shorter and shorter, and all the nights are getting longer. And Adam Rishon is afraid. He's afraid that the sin that he did in Gan Eden has caused a darkness to the world. Finally, the days are so short that Adam Rishon he's frightened. He's very scared. As the Gemara says, he says, perhaps because of the sin, the world is becoming dark and will return to the state of what? Toyu, Vavayu, and Chayshech. Chayshech, al panei tahayim. There's going to be a Chayshech, there's going to be a darkness again. The world will return to darkness. And this is part of the death that God decreed that would happen on the day that we ate from the tree. So Adam Rishon accepted an 8-day fast and prayer. 8 days of fast and prayer, where he prayed to God to return to him and to resolve what's going on with the days and the nights. On the 25th day of Kislev, Adam Rishon recognizes that the nights and the days, the day is no longer getting shorter, and the nights are no longer getting longer. And Adam Rishon made an 8-day party. This is the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Ches Amud Aleph. I'm sorry. And he made an 8-day party. The Gemara says not only that, the next year he made a 16-day party. 8 days for what was originally the fast day, and then another 8 days for what would later become Hanukkah. So already Adam Rishon is making a party. But what exactly is this party about? What's the meaning of the party? What's going on is that Adam Rishon recognizes that there's chayshach, there's darkness. It's in the middle of the winter, it's cold. At least at that point it probably wasn't cold, because cold and heat only happened after Noach and after the floods. But it's dark. Most of the days are dark. Most of the time that you're awake, there's only a small amount of daytime and a tremendous amount of nighttime. And even though Adam Rishon is still in the depths of winter, he's not close to the summer, he's not close to spring. But he realizes there's a light. The sun comes out, and the sun shines for just a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer, this sunlight. And he recognizes that there's hope and there's a future. So we go on, we have the Mabul, the floods. Right? Humanity isn't worth its existence, and God decrees that he'll flood the entire world and end the world, end human existence other than Noach and his family floating around on a boat for basically a year. And again, at the end of the year, Noach, you could say, is all the way deep at the end, right? It's like the world was totally destroyed. The upper 30 feet of the world was completely washed away and destroyed. The whole world is wrecked. And finally he could see that the mountaintops, maybe there's going to be hope. We'll get out of here. The Teva stops on the top of a mountain. He sends out the raven, right? The raven doesn't listen to him. The raven just circles around the Teva. He doesn't look for land. And he takes the raven back in. He sends out the dove. The dove comes back with nothing, empty-handed. A week later he tries again. He sends out the dove. What does the dove return with? An olive branch. There are those that say, one of the Chassidish Sfarim, they say that Noach squeezed the olives, and that later was in the Pach Shem that they found in the time of the Menorah. I couldn't find stronger sources for that other than the Imre Noyam, but I think there's a message there. Why is the dove chosen? And why is the olive branch the symbol? And why is the olive oil later the oil that's used for the service? So Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, are compared to a dove. The Jewish people are compared to the bird, the dove. When there's a dialogue in Songs of Songs, Shir HaShirim, between the Jewish people and God is knocking on the door. My beloved knocks. Let me in, my own, my darling, my faultless dove. Yenasi Samosi, my perfect dove. That's what the Jewish people are called. And the olive branch that the dove grabbed in its mouth would later become the global symbol of peace. Right? The olive tree is the tree of peace. The olive branch is the sign of peace. It's on the UN symbols, etc. The Medrash explains what was going on with the olive branch. Why is it the olive branch was chosen to make the oil that was used in the Beis HaMikdash? So the Medrash says it's comparable to a king that had a set of legions, and all of the legions mutinied. They all became traitors and joined the enemy, except for one. The king said that one legion, they'll become the royal family. They'll become the pure bloods, the officers, the governors. They'll define royalty in this kingdom. In the time of the floods, the world was crossbreeding between man and angel, men who were choosing to marry not only women but also men and animals, and the animals themselves were crossbreeding. There was a tremendous amount of destruction that was caused by individuals, men, animals, and even the plant kingdom. Noach brought with him seeds on the teva of all the plants that didn't crossbreed. But there was only one plant that one species that refrained from crossbreeding, that was the olive tree. And therefore the olive tree was set the standard of royalty from then on. That was God's promise to the olive tree. And the message here of Noach, of the dove coming back with the olive branch, is a deep one. It's that even though you're at the end of global desolation, of an apocalyptic destruction, but there's a future, and the future is the Jewish people serving God with the olive tree. It's the future of the Jewish people being loyal to God in a difficult time, and that will be the light that will bring the Geula, the redemption. We continue onwards in this past week's Parashas Vayishlach. We learn about the battle between Yaakov and the angel. So what happened was Yaakov is running away from Esav. He's pursuing him with 400 men, intending to kill him. And Yaakov uses a multi-pronged strategy to address the threat. So he divides his belongings, he divides his family, he prepares for war, and he sends gifts. And as part of the assembling and the dividing up of his family, he gathers all his possessions and crosses over a brook called the Yabok, the Nachal Yabok. Vayaver as kol asher lo, he brings everything over the river. Now, Jewish thinkers have always taught that the word kol, whenever the word everything is used, it's a code word. It means everything of spiritual substance. When Yaakov and Esav meet in that meeting place that took place in last week's parasha, so we learn that they get into a discussion. Yaakov says, Yeshli kol, I have everything. And what does Esav say? Yeshli rov, I have a lot of stuff. If you look at the Aleph Beis, the letters of kol are right in the middle. The middle letters are Yud and Mem. The middle letters are Chaf and Lamet. The middle letters of the Aleph Beis are Chaf and Lamet. And that the middle meaning that kol represents everything. If you look at Rov, it doesn't start at the beginning. It starts with a Beis, that's the second letter of the alphabet, and it ends with a Resh, which is the third to last. Because if you're looking for material possessions, you start in the middle and you end somewhere in the middle. You'll never have everything. That's why Esav, as a pursuer of material possessions, he says, Yeshli Rav, I got a lot of stuff. You can always have a lot, but you can never have everything. But when you're in the pursuit of spirituality, so you can spirituality always contains the possibility of having in entirety in its spiritual dimension. So when it says that Yaakov Avinu transferred all his possessions, it means that he transferred everything of spiritual substance. But yet he goes back over the river. What's he looking for? He's looking for what? Pachim ketanim. He's looking for small jugs. Pach. These small jugs, the Sifsei Chachamim explains, were pretty worthless. And in spiritual terms, he would say that they were empty of spiritual substance. The only redeeming factor was, so to speak, that Yaakov owned them. That was the only reason why he went back for them. And in that darkness, in the midst of the night, he travels alone. Vayivasar Yaakov levada. He stands alone. And what happens? He meets up with the angel of Esav. Vayavek ish imay ad alois hashachar. He gets into a battle. Vayavek, he gets into a tussle, a wrestle. They're on each other. They're wrestling each other, trying to knock each other down, deliver that knockout blow. But the Gemara says Vayavik has another definition. Vayavik means they created dust. What happened was the angel of evil, the angel of Esav that he meets and wrestles with, he creates a cloud of dust. What that means in spiritual terms is that he's trying to cover God's providence. He's trying to hide God's presence. And what he's battling with Yaakov is he's battling with Yaakov for the future, when God's presence will no longer be readily apparent. And he's looking to strike Yaakov not at the moment where Yaakov Avinu is in a moment of sunlight, in a moment where he's strong and he's able to fight, but he's looking to attack him when he's vulnerable, when he's alone in a dark place. Esav's not interested in a fair battle. He's not looking for an even, heavyweight to heavyweight match. He'll do a heavyweight to featherweight, right? He's looking for a knockout. He doesn't care there's no rules to the game. And that's why he chooses Yaakov in a vulnerable position. Vayar ki lo yochaloi. The angel of evil sees he can't subdue Yaakov Avinu. So what happened? Vayiga b'kaf yirechai. He struck him in his thigh. What that means here is that Yaakov Avinu represents there are 7 dimensions in spirituality that come down. And Yaakov Avinu represents one of the middle forces. If you look at the human body, in the torso and above, all those things are necessary for productivity and maintenance of life. You want to be productive, you need hands. You need to live, you need a heart, you need lungs. If you want to live more than a few hours, you need to have a liver, you need to have a stomach, intestines. But with feet, you don't need feet to live, you need feet to move. Feet are the agents of mobility. They're not the agents of productivity, those are the hands. They're not the agents of thought, that's in the brain. They don't regulate life cycles, that's in the torso. And what happens is, what Esav sees here is, what the angel of evil sees is that he's unable to strike Yaakov in his essence, in his productivity, in his thought, in the constant life cycle that sustains him, his intestinal system, his cardiac systems. Those are impenetrable. So he tries to knock out Yaakov's mobility. He tries to deliver a knockout punch to his feet, his left foot. And that's where he succeeds. Vayiga b'kaf yirecha, he's able to blow Yaakov in his left thigh. And that's why the verse ends, that's why the Jewish people don't eat the sciatic nerve. To remember that's where Esav had a force over Yaakov. The angel of evil's force wasn't in Yaakov's essence. It wasn't in the Jewish people's essence. It was in the Jewish people as you transport them through time, in their mobility through time. When the Jewish people are not at their greatest point in history, but are struggling to move through the more difficult parts of history, that's where Esav is going to have strength. So let's try to explain this a little deeper, if we can. The 2 thighs are representing the forces of Netzach, eternity, and Hayit, splendor. These midos are the forces that provide sustenance. Not sustenance. These are the spiritual energies that allow prophets to walk the earth. The force of Netzach, and to a smaller extent the force of Hayit. And that means that in a historical perspective, Hannukah occurs at the conclusion of prophecy. The last one to witness prophets was Shimon HaTzadik. His student is Yochanan ben Yezer. Yochanan ben Yezer's nephew is one of the leaders of the Hellenists at the time of the miracle of Hanukkah. The miracle of Hanukkah occurs in the lifetime of Yochanan ben Yezer, but not during the lifetime of Shimon HaTzadik, because Shimon HaTzadik is in a period of prophetic insight. Prophetic insight means the world is clear. Everything is clear. It's as light as day. The evil angel does not have a power. The force of Esav is powerless against God when he's clear. When you can just go to the prophet will tell you all the things you did wrong today. He'll tell you what to do and what your solution is. And every time there's a tragedy, he'll be able to pinpoint exactly and correctly what the cause of the tragedy was. Unfortunately, when we have tragedies, everyone's searching for answers. We never have any good ones. There are many different answers, and we can never figure out what they are, because we don't have prophecy. We live in a time of avok, where there's dust, where God's providence is covered over by a cloud of dust. And that's where we have to tussle with Esav. And that's where Esav has that power to strike in that midah of Hayit, in the time period of Hanukkah. In the time period of Hanukkah, there is a susceptibility. There's no more prophecy. We're susceptible now to that pain that the angel of evil struck Yaakov Avinu. And that's what the battle is really happening. But there's a conclusion to the battle. Immediately following the battle, what occurs? This battle occurs, Vayavik ish imay ad aloi sashachar. The battle occurs until dawn, until the sun breaks in the morning. Once the sun breaks, it says, Vayizrach le hashemesh. The sun came out. When the sun came out, the angel of evil was gone. He would never try to attack Yaakov Avinu with the sun out. But there's another deeper idea going through. This is the same sun that came out for Avram, for Adam Harishon, when he was in the middle of a dark winter and depressed, dismayed that the world was going to end. Vayizrach le hashemesh. The sun came out. It shone. This is the inyan of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the time where Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, even though they're not, there's a cloud of dust. There's no more prophecy. It's a difficult time. It's a time where we don't know what's going to happen. It's the first time people can openly abandon their Judaism and claim a different religion, which was extremely rare. Told them they had idol worship. Idol worship was fairly common, but idol worship recognized that there was a unified, there was a single God. It was just that you were serving the intermediaries. At this time, the Hellenists abandoned everything. They intermarried. They abandoned complete Jewish observance. And it was a powerful force within Judaism at the time. There were very few who were willing to stand up against it, because it was a time where there were no more prophets. Nobody could tell you what went wrong or why anything went wrong. If you look at the Ushpizin that come on Sukkot, there are 7 Ushpizin guests. They correspond to these 7 energies. The 5th one of them corresponding to the Midah of Haid. The Midah of Haid is the Midah of humility, of subservience, of understanding that despite the wisdom that we can achieve, that the wisdom that's found in Greek culture, to serve Hashem, to serve God properly, requires a subservience, a humbling, to recognize that Avodas Hashem, the service of God, is something that a person has to sacrifice his identity for. As opposed to the secular knowledge of the Greeks, where one's identity became the knowledge that they studied. The knowledge was used to build your identity, to become a somebody. As opposed to in Judaism, where connecting with God was an act of humility and subservience. The person who expresses this force, this energy, the man who brings that force to the world is Aaron HaKohen. It's the people of the Kohanim that bring this force, and that's why in the time of the miracle of Hanukkah, it was the Kohanim that led the battle to win over the Syrian Greeks. In order to bring out that sunlight that happens at the end, to bring out the light of the Or Hagonos, right? The light that was hidden at the first day of creation. That light that really had the force to combat the darkness that was in the null state of the world. That state that Adam Rishon thought he would bring back. You needed the Kohanim to reveal that. We'll move a little bit further in history. There's another person who made a Hanukkah party after Yaakov Avinu. Anyone want to try now? Yosef Atzadik. The Shiltei Giborim brings from the Mordechai. The Shiltei Giborim is a halacha sefer. He wants to know of halachic sources or at least remozim, hints of where we find the source to make a festive suda, festive meal on Hanukkah, to make a Hanukkah party and celebrate the victory over the Greeks. So he brings a quote from the Mordechai. It's a very interesting one. So what happens is Yosef is meeting with the tribes. The tribes, so there's a hunger in the land of Israel. The tribes go down to Egypt. They don't realize that Yosef is the leader, right? And Yosef doesn't reveal himself. He tells them to go back to Israel, bring back Binyamin. So as Yosef Atzadik is bringing himself into the moments, Joseph is bringing himself to the moments where he's going to reveal himself. So he makes a party for the brothers. They come back with Binyamin, so he thanks them for bringing back Binyamin, which was like he instructed, the viceroy's instructions. They followed his instructions, so he promised them he'll make them a party. Vayomer la'asher al beisa, he commanded his servants, Haveh sanashim habayisa, go bring these shvatim, who at that time did not realize they were talking to Joseph, bring them to my house, u'tevoyach tevach v'hochen, slaughter an animal and prepare it. Because tonight, because tonight, this afternoon, these people are going to eat with me. And I want them to join with me in the meal. The Gemara explains, what is utavoyach tevach? Slaughter or slaughtering. It means he instructed his servants to slaughter the animal correctly according to Jewish ritual slaughter. What is the v'hachin? What's that preparation? He told them to remove the sciatic nerve, the gid hanasha. Says the Shilta Giborim, if you take the word tevach v'hochen, pull the ches out of tevach, and the vav he chof nun out of v'hochen, you get the letters of Hanukkah. And that's a remez, that's a hint to the Yom Tiv, the idea of making a Suda on Hanukkah. But obviously there's something deeper going on here, right? The Suda of Hanukkah involves what? The first remez, the first hint in the Torah for a Suda of Hanukkah includes what? Removing the sciatic nerve. You're removing the gid hanasha. This is the sciatic nerve that the angel of evil struck on Yaakov to be able to create the force of evil that would later subdue the Jewish people before the victory of the Chashmonaim in the time of Hanukkah. And the message here that Yosef HaTzadik is saying by removing the sciatic nerve is that the festivities of Hanukkah and the celebration of Hanukkah involves the recognition that on Hanukkah we win, even though the gid hanasha, Yaakov's thigh is struck, it's damaged, he's limping, and it's going to be a difficult time to move through the rest of history as the clouds of dust cover God's providence. Yet at that moment, during the celebration of Hanukkah, we remove the sciatic nerve. So to speak, the message here is that during that celebration, during the Yom Tov of Hanukkah, we have a koyach, we have a force, a spiritual energy to conquer the Yevonim and to conquer the force that allowed Esav, or the angel of evil, to strike Yaakov Avinu. During Hanukkah, the angel has no power. That's the same sunlight that came out after that event, where the sunlight of Hanukkah, the light of Hanukkah is able to mitigate, at least for the period of Hanukkah, the force of Esav. We'll finish now with two other remozim, two other hints in the Torah to the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. During the time of the consecration of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, when they were doing a Chanukah Sabayis on the Mishkan, each leader of a tribe brought an offering to God as part of the process of the consecration. That's the Kriyas Torah on Hanukkah. We go through all the 12 offerings. They're mentioned individually in Parshas Nasai. Each one of these offerings. So all 12 of these leaders brought offerings except for Aaron HaKohen. And Aaron HaKohen turned to God and he was upset. He felt bad. He wanted to participate in the celebrations of inaugurating the Mishkan, the tabernacle. So the Medrash teaches that he got a conciliatory prize. What was it? It was the lighting of the menorah. So Rashi says, because the menorah is lit twice a day. That was the consolation prize. So the Ramban asks, well, he does a lot of things twice a day. Aaron HaKohen got to bring the ketores, he got to bring the incense. He also got to bring karbanos, offerings twice a day. So why do we need to say that why was it the menorah? What was unique about the menorah that it was the consolation prize? So the Ramban says we're not referring here to the menorah of the temple. We're referring to something else entirely. What we're referring here is to the lighting of the menorah that will happen eternally. After the second Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, there is no menorah in the temple anymore. Beis HaMikdash has no menorah. But there is a menorah in every Jew's house. And we light that menorah in commemoration of the Chashmonaim, of the Kohanim, who are descendants of Aaron. And God promises Aaron, your gift is better, because your gift is eternal. Because the Nesiim, the leaders of the tribes, they brought a one-time offering. They brought an offering. Maybe it has a power as long as the temple is standing, as long as the Beis HaMikdash is up, is built. But the koyach of the menorah is something that's going to last for eternity. Finish with one more remez and try to put it all together. In Parashas Emor, the Torah goes through all the different Yom Tovim. We start with Pesach, we go to Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And we conclude, Eila Moyadei Hashem, these are the Yom Tovim, that these are the holidays that we serve God. All the holidays of the year. And what follows immediately after the list of holidays? So remember, the last holiday of the list is Sukkot. Sukkot is the final holiday that's mentioned on the list. The Torah concludes the holiday segment, and the next parsha is when Aharon lights the candles, the menorah, the mitzvah of menorah. Says the Rekeach, a great medieval Kabbalist, that is a remez to the menorah, to the mitzvah of Hanukkah. That following Sukkot, following the conclusion of the holiday schedule, right? So there's a 6-month break or 5-month break between Sukkot and either Purim or Pesach. But in the midst of the winter, there's going to be a holiday, the holiday of the menorah, of Hanukkah. The Rekeach says that there are just like the Or Hagonos were burned for 36 hours, we light the menorah, we light 36 candles. If you count all the candles we light, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's 36. 36 candles we light on Hanukkah. And the illusion here is that Hanukkah, the menorah, is that light that God hid in the beginning of time. So go back now to the beginning of the story. The first thing in creation we learn about is the exile. Choshech, a darkness that falls al Pnei Tohaim. And that choshech, that darkness, is what? It's the exile of the Greeks, of the Syrian Greeks. And immediately following that, the revelation that there will be a dark exile, we have Yehi Or. We have the revelation that there will be a light. Which light? The light of the Or Hagonos, the spiritual light. The spiritual light, which in spiritual terms, you can have all the physical dust in the world, but the spiritual light sees through it all, because it's not limited by physical limitations. You can have the evil angel of Esav, who kicks up all the dust into the air to try to blind God's providence, so that nobody knows that there's a God. But yet, through the mitzvah of Hanukkah, through the menorah of Hanukkah, through that light, the spiritual light, we could see right through all of it. When we light the menorah, what we're doing is we're connecting. Our feeling is that we're now able to light a light in the midst of a dark exile. It could be in the middle of the winter, and it could appear that the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting longer, and there's no end to the exile. It's a time of even if we're dismayed and despaired, that the world looks hopeless, which is the way Adam HaRishon perceived it before he made his Hanukkah party, we could see that as well. We could see when we're lighting the Hanukkah party that there's hope and there's a future. Vayivosar Yaakov levada. Yaakov is left alone, right? That's when he experiences this battle with the angel of Esav. But the Medrash actually has a very interesting comparison. The Medrash says this is similar to V'niskav Hashem levada b'yom. So let's try to explain what that means briefly, and then we'll stop from Erev. Vayivosar Yaakov levada means he was abandoned. He was alone. It was dark. It was the middle of the night. He was frightened. V'niskav Hashem levada means quite the opposite. It means that God has this is at the end of time, where God reigns supreme, all of evil has been annihilated, and God rules. If I had to give a comparison, Vayavosar Yaakov Levadai, that's when a kid doesn't get into the school of his choice, right? He's alone, he's nobody, right? Viniska Hashem Levadai, that's when Mike Tyson wins the title cup, right? Viniska of Mike Tyson Levadai, he's alone, right? Because he's the only one to have the title championship. It's a very bizarre comparison. Viniska means it's exalted. It's like, wow, he's the only one that has the title. And Vayavosar is like, he's left alone, abandoned, there's nothing left. The fact that the Medrash compares them, I think, is a message here in the Avodah of Hanukkah. We could feel alone, we could feel that the time of Golus, the exile has been too long. And it's time to go back to Eretz Yisrael already. We've had enough. We're alone. We're lonely. It's dark. It's night. There's a lot of dust all over the place. God's providence is not clear. There's tragedies, and like the one that occurred today, unfortunately, where a member of our community's great nephew was passed away. And we don't know why. Nobody knows why. And we struggle to understand what's going on in every tragedy because we don't have prophets to tell us. But by lighting the candles, we recognize that there's going to be a time of v'niska of Hashem levadai, that the loneliness that we feel is going to be the loneliness of being exalted, of being the title championship. The loneliness, we'll feel the loneliness of being the victors of time, being victorious over the angel of evil that struck us in our thigh and made us all these difficulties. And as we approach Hanukkah, as we approach the menorah, lighting the menorah, that's our feeling. Our feeling is that even though it's difficult, there's a long exile, we have all these crazy ideas floating around our culture, a culture that completely denies God, completely obscures Him. It kicks up a layer of dust around Him. But still we light the menorah, and we say one day, V'nizkav Hashem levadai, we're going to feel exalted. We'll be the title champions. Thank you.